Hello again. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy, and this is episode 324, Choosing Server Hardware. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about choosing the hardware that you need to use for your servers. So if you decide to build a LAMP server, a Linux Apache MySQL PHP server, a web server, what hardware will you use? If you decide to build a Windows 2012 Active Directory server, what hardware will you use? Build an FTP server, so on and so forth. The question is, what hardware will you use to build your server? And the issue is, most people don't realize that server hardware isn't that much different than normal PC desktop hardware, and that in fact you can use normal PC desktop hardware for your server depending upon the requirements. Basically, all server hardware is it's hardware that has been built specifically to run in an enterprise environment, generally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you don't need that much reliability out of your server, you don't necessarily need to spend $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 on the hardware in order to build it. So this came up because right here, I'm about to build a Zen virtualization hypervisor server so that I can do an episode to show you guys hypervisor virtualization. And so I need to build a server for myself so I can do a class for you. And so since I'm building a server for myself in the real world, I figured, hey, why not show you guys all the things that you need to be thinking about for when you guys go out to build your server. Now, the important thing to remember is, what is a server? A server is simply a computer that provides services to client computers. Again, FTP, File Transfer Protocol server, Active Directory, a security server, a web server, something like that. Now, the requirements for the server are going to depend upon the load you place on the server. So when you're dealing with normal desktop PCs, what you have to think about when you're building out the computer is basically what kind of software are you going to be running on the computer? Are you going to be doing high definition video encoding? Are you going to be trying to run very fast, very complicated video games? If you do, you need a lot better hardware. You need an i7 processor. You should have a solid state hard drive. You should have a very good video card, right? If you're running high-powered software on your desktop computer. Well, if all you're doing is running a web browser or, editing documents in Word, getting your email and Outlook, well, then you don't need such a high-power computer, right? You can probably go out to Best Buy for $300, pick up a laptop, and it will do everything you need. When you're building a desktop computer, you look at the applications that are going to be used on the computer and then determine the hardware that you need to make sure the computer runs well. Well, when you're dealing with a server, what you're thinking about is the load the server will be put under. So you have to think about what resources the server software itself needs. And then you have to think about how many client connections are going to be connecting to that computer and what load those clients are going to be putting on your server. Why this is important is when you go to build your server, depending upon the load, depends on what kind of hardware you need. If you are going to be building a test server in your house that only you are going to connect to, or only you and your family members are going to connect to, it can be a lot less powerful than an enterprise server, like an Active Directory server, that has to deal with 10,000 user accounts, because that means 10,000 users are going to be hammering the hell out of this thing, right? So what you should be thinking about is, what is the load you're going to be putting on your server? If all you're doing is creating a little web server so that you can experiment with PHP programming, you can get away with an Atom processor on an ITX motherboard, some computer that can cost you $150, right? No big deal. On the other hand, if you're going to be dealing with, again, an Active Directory server or an Exchange server that has thousands of accounts hammering it, then you're probably going to need to go out and buy $5,000, $10,000 in hardware alone and then configure it. So when you're dealing with desktop computers, you're looking at the applications themselves that you're going to be using. With servers, you look at the software that will be on there, but then you also look at the client load. How many clients are going to be hammering your server? What are the requirements for all those clients? And that will determine your hardware. Again, if it's just a little computer in your test lab, you can get away with a really crappy piece of hardware because all that's happening is you're connecting to it. On the other hand, again, if you're putting this out in the production environment, 1,000 users are going to be hammering this thing, then you need to buy better hardware. So with that, let's go over. I have a whole pile of hardware for us to take a look at, for you guys to think, what kind of hardware do you want to use? So, oops, let me position my little monitor thing so I can see myself. So this is the hardware that I have set up. So we can talk about all these different types of hardware that you can install your server operating system on. So this is an Itx case. This has a little Atom processor in it. So this is about the least powerful computer you can go out there and possibly buy. It's incredibly energy efficient and it's incredibly small. So I mean, look at the size of this thing. So this is nice and small. We'll talk about the benefits of that in a little bit. This is a 1U server. So this is a rack-mounted 1U server. So this, if you have a server rack, this would go into that server rack. It's called a 1U server because of the size of it. With server racks, you measure the size of your computer cases by U's. This is a 1U server-mounted server rack case. Below it is a 4U server rack case. Then, of course, we have a normal ATX case you've probably seen. We have a laptop computer, 4 gigs of RAM, pretty nice. And then we have the Uber, the insane 4U case. So this case alone cost $800 when I bought it, and we're going to talk about it because there is some really cool stuff about this case, but it's also expensive, and it's probably complete overkill for 99.99999% of the population. But these are the options you have. So when you're thinking about server hardware, don't just think about the 1U case. Don't just think about a rack-mounted case. Think about it. You can install Linux on any of these. You can install Windows 2008 or 2012 or 2003 on any of these. It all depends upon what you're doing. So let's talk first about the Itx case. So this is an Atom processor. There's an Atom processor in here, and this is an Itx case. So the Atom processors were built off of the old Pentium 4 architecture. The thing is, they are just smaller and a lot more energy efficient. So the power supply for this particular computer is something only like 35 watts. So this does not use very much power for this whole computer. Why this can be good is if all you need is a simple file server, so you're gonna create a Linux, let's say a Samba file server. So Samba file servers allow you to share Windows files, just being able to copy and paste, share network drives, so on and so forth. This would be a perfect computer probably for one of your clients. Why? It's incredibly low power, it's incredibly quiet, and again, something that you have to think about for your clients is things like form factor and size. Something like this is very small. You can tuck it into a corner and you don't have to worry about it. This doesn't get very hot. This doesn't get hot like a Xeon processor, so you don't have to worry about it overheating, especially now that you can buy 3 terabyte hard drives. You can plug one of those 3 terabyte hard drives into one of these things, and you can have an absolutely insane, amazing, wonderful little file server that's not going to cost a lot of money, that you can build, so on and so forth. The issue with this, though, is that there's not a lot of system resources in this because the CPU is only an Atom CPU. So the CPU in one of these guys is essentially the same types of CPU that's running the new tablet computers. So if you go out and buy one of the low-cost Windows 8 tablet computers, that is essentially the processor that is running this thing. So obviously, it's not the fastest thing in the world, not the best thing in the world. But again, if all you need is a little test computer, if all you're doing is something that requires limited resources from the clients, this can be a very good option. Now we go down and we look at the 1U server. So the 1U server, again, is one of these big guys. So this is what you think of as a professional server. So this is a server you would put into a server rack, and it would sit there and it would chug along doing whatever it does all day. So I have 2 of these 1U servers. The reason I originally bought them was because I was using them to run everymanit.com in the beginning. So one of these was a LAMP server that ran the website. The other one was a Windows 2008 web server that ran the Flash media server. So these servers were put into a co-location facility, so a data center where I paid money, basically for rack space and for bandwidth. They went in and they ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you guys are thinking these things are going to be really cool. But I'm going to tell you, for most of you guys, this is overkill. Now, when you go to buy these things, the thing to think about is you cannot build a 1U server like you can build most other computers. The reason is it has special hardware inside. The motherboard is configured a certain way. Obviously, the power supply is not a normal power supply, so on and so forth. So what you can do, what I did, is you can get an ASUS bare bones system. An ASUS bare bones system basically gives you the case with the motherboard and the power supply, and then you add your own processor, RAM, and hard drives. So if you want to build your own 1U case, that's what you have to do. You have to buy a bare bone system. This cost me about $600 or $700 for the bare bone part. Then I added the Xeon processor, I added the RAM, I added the hard drives, and there you go. So with this, one of the nice things, what you need to be looking at, what you need to be thinking about with your server is, do you need to be able to replace hard drives very easily and quickly? With real, quote-unquote, real server hardware, they will have what are called hot swappable hard drive bays built in. The idea is if you have RAID, redundant array of inexpensive disks, and one of the drives fails, you can pop out the bad drive, you can replace it, you can plug it back in, and then everything will get rebuilt. You don't have to take the computer offline. You don't have to turn the computer off. You can do this repair while the computer is still running. So these are hot swappable drive bays. Again, depending on what you're doing, that could be very useful. The one problem with these 1U servers is obviously look at how thin they are, right? These are they're big, but they're thin. The reason is they get slotted into these server cabinets. The issue is with all computers, right? The danger, the enemy of computers is heat. The worst thing in the world is heat. Now the problem is with this design, with this form factor, it is very difficult to cool these types of servers, especially when you put 20 or 30 in the same rack. Think about 30 servers all chugging along, creating heat in like a cabinet like that big, right? You got 50 of them all stacked on top of each other. Well, the reason I would suggest you guys don't buy these computers is because in order to cool a server like this, it has to have very powerful fans to pull the air in from the front. If you notice, there's holes all through the front. It pulls the air through the front to cool the hard drives, through the case and out the back. Well, this is a very thin form factor. It's very hard to pull air through a form factor like this. And so it's very hard to pull air through a form factor like this. It means that it has to have super powerful fans, right? Well, guess what? The problem with super powerful fans is that they are loud as hell. So if I turn this on, that is what this server sounds like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'm hoping that my little microphone over there isn't like auto reducing the noise that this thing is making, but this is loud. This is like a vacuum cleaner. This is like a vacuum cleaner running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't want this on your desk. You don't want this in the next room. You want this in a server room that is really, 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 really far away from where everybody else is working. Again, imagine in a normal server cabinet where if you have 50 of these things all stacked on top of each other, these things get loud very, very, very quickly. So that's one of the issues that you have to deal with these one-use servers. And that is why I say that usually one-use servers are not something that you want to mess with. They seem cool, they look cool, all the cool professionals have these servers, until you get this thing, you plug it in and it's sitting behind your desk, and you want to rip your hair out after not too long. So that's the one-use server for you. Now the next one that I want you to look at is this is a for-use server, but it uses normal ATX components. So this is a for-use server, but the difference between like this server and actually that server over there is that you can hand build this with all normal components. So this is a normal 380 watt Antec power supply you can buy at Newegg or Best Buy. If this thing dies, you can go to Best Buy and buy another one. This is a normal ATX board. This is a normal processor. This is normal RAM, so on and so forth. So with a 4U case like this, you can buy simply the case. I like our iStar USA cases. You can buy this rack mounted case, and then you can just build it like I have. So I have about 4 of these cases. I just put in parts, I swap them out, I do whatever the hell I want. With that one-use server, what you see is what you get. I can swap the RAM, I can swap the hard drives, but that's it. With this thing, I can swap the power supply, I can swap the entire motherboard, I can do whatever I want. So this is a for-use server, but this is one that you can actually build yourself and put whatever it is that you want in here. One of the things, again, when we're looking at the options for server cases that this case has that you may want to consider for your servers is you will notice it has doors, right? So on this side, again, we have these hot swappable drive bays. Again, that's how you know it's a real server case. On the other side, there's nothing. There's a DVD drive in here. I don't know if you can see it. But again, one of the things we talk about in security is everybody is always worried about, Chinese hackers doing all kinds of weird stuff to your computers from, the middle of Mongolia or something. Well, in reality, the biggest threat to your computer is employees and people around your own office building that do stupid things to your server. That they think a hard drive failed on one server, and they go to the wrong server and pull out a hard drive on it, and they crash everything. Well, the nice thing when you have doors like this is, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a little knob, and there's actually a physical lock with a physical key. If you don't have that key, you can't get into this case, which means you can't pull the hard drives, which means you can't get to the CD-ROM. Basically, that makes this thing physically more secure. So that is one of the reasons that you should look at a case like this, because it's good. Now, if we go over here, let's pull this over. This is just a normal standard ATX case. If you guys have been building computers, you've probably seen a case like this. This is the same case we used on all of our computers back when I had the shop, when we built computers for the clients. I had like 1 million of these cases. But again, all you do is you put the motherboard in there and you build it normally. Now the interesting thing, you're probably looking at all this equipment and you wonder which is the most powerful server here. And actually, this thing right here is. So although this is in a normal ATX case with no fancy protection, no fancy anything, this is actually the most powerful server here. This has 2 PCI Express slots in there for very high quality RAID cards. This has a Xeon processor. This has something like 16 gigs of RAM. This is actually really awesome server hardware. Well, it was really awesome server hardware about 4 years ago, but it's really high quality server hardware that was just put into a normal case. So depending on what you're doing, you can put really high quality server hardware into a normal case. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make the motherboard work any less well. You know what I'm saying? So think about that. A lot of people think that when they're building servers that they have to use, these fancy cases and whatnot. And the reality is is you don't. The best hardware I have down in this basement, at least for servers, is in fact in this crappy little ATX case. Now, the next one that I want to talk about, if we can go over here, make sure I'm still in the shot. So this is the Mama Jamma server case. So this was a server case I actually bought all of that server hardware for years ago. So this was the insane file server that I had when I was running my computer repair shop. So this had 16 1 terabyte hard drives in it. RAID 6 configuration, which means 2 hard drives could fail, the other ones would keep running. So we had 16 terabytes of hard drive space in here, 14 usable terabytes of hard drive space. Basically, this was used to pump all the data from my clients' machines when we were doing repairs on them. So if we were going to do a wipe and reload, we would back up all the data to this machine, and then it would be backed up for months and months and months and months and months. So when you look at this, this has a lot of interesting things that normal server cases don't have. So if we look again, where I was talking about things like fans before. So this has some mammoth fans in it. So each one of these little beige things is a fan, and it's a very big, hot swappable fan. So if this fan failed, I could simply pull it out and put another one in. Again, this thing is going to be twice as loud as that 1U server because all the fans it has. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fans. That doesn't include the CPU fan. That doesn't include all the hard drives spinning up, so on and so forth. This is going to be very, very, very loud. Again, this has those hot swappable drive bays. So you can pull a hard drive out, you can put it in. Why this was important? Because this has a RAID card. This was actually the RAID card. So when we're talking about RAID, redundant array of inexpensive disks, that means you can combine multiple hard drives, physical hard drives, to create one logical hard drive. Why you use RAID is because if one drive fails, you can swap that drive out, put a new one in, and it doesn't affect how the server is running. So one of these RAID cards back then, again, this was about an $800 RAID card. This was plugged in, so I could have all these 16 hard drives connected with that. So basically, that's what was happening with the hard drives. All those were connected to this RAID card, which was connected to the motherboard. If one failed, I could pop out that one hard drive, plug in a new hard drive, and the server stayed up and running. One of the things, when we're talking about servers, and was a big thing in the past, I do not believe it is that important anymore, is redundant power supplies. So one of the reasons this case was so expensive, so this case was like $700 or $800, is it has redundant power supplies. If you look in here, there are actually 3 power supplies. So you have this one, you have this one, and you have the third one down here. Any one of these power supplies will keep this server running. The idea is, again, when you're talking about servers in the enterprise world, you want to make sure that they're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What is a main point of failure? A main point of failure can be your power supply. So if you have redundant power supplies, if one fails, you literally can just pull it out. You can grab a different one, you can plug it in, and your server never goes down. So this right here, when we're talking about real enterprise server hardware, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Supports 16 hard drives, hot swappable, redundant power supply, blah, 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 blah. But the issue is it's very, 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 very expensive. So the final thing that I want to show you when you're thinking about building your server is, that's the highest end thing you can do. Or you can do also what I do here for a lot of my test computers is you can go to Best Buy and for $400 you can buy one of these things. One of these things is really nice. It's a laptop computer. What kind of laptop computer? Is that a server laptop computer, Eli? No, it's a crappy gateway computer from Best Buy. It cost me $400. Think about it. This has a dual core processor in there. It has 4 gigs of RAM. It has a 500 gig hard drive. It has a monitor, and it has a keyboard built in. It has its own built-in UPS because it has its own battery backup. This is actually an incredibly great, wonderful type of server, depending on what you're trying to do. If I was still dealing with clients, I would probably be installing these as full-fledged servers, a little bit better than this, because for an office with only, let's say, 10 people in it, this would do a wonderful job. What you have to think about is the load on the server, how many users are accessing it, how many users are hammering it. And again, if you're dealing with an office of 10 people, maybe even 20 people, one little $400, $500, $800 laptop can really do a good job. Because the issue is when you're thinking about these servers, you don't just have to think about the server, but you also have to think about the infrastructure involved with the server. So again, why I like laptops, why I like ATX cases, and why I like Itx cases is because I don't need things like server racks. So if I go with the 1U server, this 4U server, this mamma jamma thing, not only do I have to buy the server and build the server and install the server, but then I have to put into a server rack, a special server rack. Server racks starting price is $500, and if you get a good one, it goes all the way up to about $2,000. So not just you have to buy the server, but you have to buy the server rack. Then when you think about it, when you stack all those servers together, you have to manage them differently and deal with them differently than when you're dealing with a laptop, computer, one of these things. You have to install a KVM switch, a keyboard video mouse switch, so that you can have one keyboard video and mouse and be able to switch between all of your different servers. Beyond that, you have noise, you have all of this stuff that you have to worry about, whereas, again, with an ITX or an ATX or a laptop, you don't have those issues. A laptop is not loud, it doesn't burn a lot of energy, it has its own built-in UPS. These things are incredibly powerful now. You can get them with 8 or 10 gigs of RAM, more than enough to run most servers. Really, it's very good. Now, you may be thinking, but Eli, this doesn't have a Xeon processor in it, right? You have to buy Xeon processors for servers. Again, remember, Xeon processors, or what is it in AMD? Is it Optitron? Anyways, AMD has their own versions of server processors. Again, those processors have been specially built for servers so that they function better for servers. So when you have 10,000 users hammering your Active Directory server, a Xeon processor will do better for you than an i5 or an i7 processor, right? Yes, when you have 10,000 people hammering your server, that is correct. If you have 10 users, or if you have 20 users, an i5 processor or an i7 processor, or even, depending on what you're doing, if you just have a little Samba server, an Atom processor might be good enough for you. So those are the things to think about. Again, when I do my little labs here, this is what I have. I have 5 of these laptops. They cost me about $400 a piece a few years ago, and this is what I use. I can throw server operating system on here. I can throw Linux on here. I can throw any kind of wacky crap I want on here. It has its own keyboard and monitor. It has its own battery backup. It has its wireless connection. Everything is just right here, and it works really, really well. Again, depending on what you're doing, a low-cost thing like this might be okay. If you need something very, very high-powered, you can buy the 1U server or this thing. But again, these are going to be very loud. So think about that from an infrastructure position. If your servers are going to be running in an area that's close to your employees, you don't want them to be really loud. So you might build your own server-mounted case with just a stock standard power supply, and then it will be quiet. These are all the options. Again, when I keep trying to tell you guys over and over and over and over and over again, and I think a lot of you don't listen to me, it is being an IT professional, being a technology professional is as much an art as it is a science or technology. It is as much about noise control, how things look, that kind of stuff, as it is about bits and bytes and TCP/IP and subnet masking and all that kind of stuff. What should you use? Who knows? This, again, right here is the most powerful system out of this entire mess. What you need All depends if you know what I'm saying. So we go back. That was the episode on choosing server hardware. Again, with this, I'm not trying to be a smarty. I'm not trying to be a smart ass. Any of that equipment over there could make a perfectly fine server. What you have to think about is what load are you going to place on the server? So what software are you going to be running on the server? And then how many clients are going to connect, right? So the more clients you have connecting, the more the server is going to be hammered. And then how reliable does a server have to be? Does it have to be 24/7? Can it be 23.957? Seriously, those redundant power supplies are very nice, but they are foolishly expensive. Those are like $300 for one of those redundant power supplies. And when you really think about it, okay, so my server dies, I grab a new power supply, I put it in, so my server is down for, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe if it takes me a minute to get there, it's 30 minutes. Is that 30 minutes worth $300 less for the server hardware? You know what I'm saying? Personally, I believe in the modern age, a lot of this redundancy for the server hardware, the requirement for it has been eliminated by virtualization. Again, if I was out in the real world being a consultant right now, instead of buying one of those $800 cases with all kinds of redundancy built into the individual case, I would go with a Type 1 hypervisor, a bare metal hypervisor that has automatic recovery built in. And basically, I would build 3 identical servers with the hypervisor, with my servers installed as virtual servers on the hypervisor. And then I would let the hypervisor deal with redundancy and reliability. So if one physical box failed, it would automatically migrate the entire server over to a different physical box. And there you will go. I would say in the modern world, that type of virtualization, it is better to have redundancy through entirely different pieces of hardware versus trying to have the redundancy within the physical server itself. So I would have 3 physical servers up and running. If one failed, the virtualization software would migrate the servers from one to another one that was working versus having redundant power supplies and RAID and all that stuff. So that's what you need to think about. You can build a server for $150, $200, or you can build one for, like I say, that big mammoth Jambo. When I built it myself, this was not Dell building it. When I built it myself, cost about $4,000 my cost. It was a really, really powerful server at the time. It was a really, really high-tech server at the time. Question is, for you, do you really need to spend that much on hardware? Does your client really need to spend that much on hardware if they've got 10 users and all they need to do is share files? That's what you guys are going to be thinking about. That is the difference between just a technician and a professional. Technician just installs it. You need a server. Here's a server. A professional figures out what the client really needs and what will serve them best. So as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This was episode 324, Choosing Server Hardware. I enjoyed taping it and look forward to seeing you at the next one.